Weather was not an issue at Lumen Field in Seattle for the Rams Seahawks NFC Championship. And one thing I want to mention, because on big games like this, I hear from people I usually don't hear from, friends, family, who only tune in for the biggest of games. So more people than usual, newsflash, watching the conference championship games. And some of the feedback I got from some of my longtime friends, and yes, contrary to popular belief, I do have friends. But one item of feedback related to the impact of the weather in Denver on the second half of the game. Because, yes, the snow looks great, but guys are slipping and sliding everywhere. How do we strike that balance? Well, as long as we have open-air stadiums in winter climates, this is going to be a risk. And I know we have fewer and fewer of them now. But as I was conversing with some of my friends via text message, I was reminded that there was a push, and it didn't last long. But there was a push from some in the league office a few years ago. Because remember, after the Damar Hamlin situation, and they got down to how are they going to resolve tiebreakers with one fewer game, and would there be a neutral site game in the playoffs? Somebody got the idea, and somebody was pushing the idea from within the walls of 345 Park Avenue to have neutral site conference championship games to create like a college football vibe where half the stadium is in support of one side and the other half is in support of the other, or 70% Indiana fans in Miami, whatever the case may be, neutral site for the conference championships. And again, it never went anywhere. But if you had an issue with the fact that the plug was pulled on both offenses in Denver today, once the snow started to accumulate, it doesn't sound like that bad of an idea. If you have an issue with weather impacting a fairly important game. So there would be a rotation. And to make it fair, you would use AFC domes for the NFC Championship game, and there would be a rotation. And you'd use NFC domes for the AFC Championship game, and there'd be a rotation. So there would never be a true home field advantage, and people would have to travel to the game. And that's how it would work. Now, look, there are pros and cons, but fresh from what happened in Denver, and again, there's more on that game coming up later, you could at least make the reasonable argument that we don't want weather to affect the outcome of a game. Flip side, makes the number one seed all the more important, although it didn't deliver a victory for the Broncos. Usually what you're going to see is cold weather team gets the advantage when weather becomes a factor. But again, it wasn't today. Weather, as mentioned earlier, not a factor in Seattle for round 3 of Rams Seahawks. And this is my favorite fact of the weekend that just occurred to me as I was sitting down. Much had been made about 15 fourth quarter lead changes in the prior 2 rounds of the playoffs, most ever in any NFL postseason. 15 fourth quarter lead changes. In 2 games today, 30 total minutes of fourth quarter football, not a single point was scored by any of the 4 teams. Made sense in the early game. But boy, in the late game, it's 31-27 in the third quarter. And I'm thinking, what's the final score here going to be? 41-38, 44-41, 45-42, whatever. However the math would have worked out. It felt like it was going to entail a lot more points after 58 total were scored through 3 quarters. And obviously that wasn't the case. And what I want to do is work backward with some of the more significant moments in the game, because obviously, and this will dovetail with the most important moment in the early game, that 4th down decision when the Rams have the ball, shadow of the Seattle end zone, down 31-27, 5 minutes or so to go, facing 4th and 4. What do you do there? And look, I am at the front of the line with the old school take the points crowd. And it's one thing to make that argument, you take the points early in a game, especially a game that figures to be low scoring and there's the possibility for weather, take the points and go up 2 scores. I think of it in terms of scores. Broncos had a chance to go up 2 scores, and they didn't. But I look at where the Rams were. Inside the 10, down 4. If they kick the field goal and make it 31-30, well, then they got to kick off. And what are you going to do? You're going to bang it out of the end zone? You're going to put it in Rashid Shaheed's hands? The Seahawks are going to have the ball. The Seahawks are going to have a chance to do exactly what they did, starting from far deeper in their own end. And look, if you score the field goal, one of the things we've seen this year, now that the touchback point is the 35 for a kickoff that goes into or out of the end zone on the fly, it doesn't take much to get yourself in field goal range. So the Seahawks burn off 3-4 minutes, score a field goal, and we're right back where we were with the Seahawks up 4, the Rams getting the ball back, as they ultimately did with not much time left. So when you look at 58 points scored in the game, when you consider that if you don't convert and Seattle gets the ball, they're deep in their own end. At some point, you got to trust your defense. And if you can stop them, you can get the ball back. Try to score a touchdown all over again. So for as much as I didn't like the decision in the early game to not take the field goal early, I'm fine with the decision to go for it late, because I don't think it plays out in a way that, and this is where we get into the analytics and the formulas and whatever the Ivy League PhDs come up with to tell you it's 51.2% versus 49.3%. I just look at it as you make it 31-30, you're still losing. And you're kicking the ball off. And you got to play defense from wherever the drive starts. I'd rather start the drive around the 5. And know I get the ball back, and this time I get the touchdown. So I don't hate the decision as much as I think others do. It's easy to hate it because the Rams lost. But under the circumstances, that one makes sense. That one is, now look, was the play executed properly? Was it the best play? Those are all things that coaches have to factor into their decisions. But where an offensive genius like Sean McVay, you trust that he's going to have a play for that moment. Just like the Seahawks, whose head coach isn't an offensive genius, had a 2-point play ready to go when it was time to go for the win in Week 16 in the Thursday night overtime classic between those two teams. So I'm fine with the fact that the Rams went with it. I'm not fine with how they played defense. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.